Looking to improve your life, brush up on your personal growth techniques? You are in the right place. Welcome to Life's Little Lessons with your host, author of Designing Your Own Destiny, Kevin A. Dunlap.
Hello, everybody. This is Kevin Dunlap with Life's Little Lessons, and welcome back to our show. Today, I have a lady that I've known on and off for the last few years, and her story, after hearing it, is something I found to be very inspirational and something that I feel that you as the listeners can really learn something from. Her name is Ronda Taylor. She actually has two companies. One is called HeartWork Publishing, where she's an award-winning book designer as well as publisher, as well as in her second business is called HeartWork Travels. So we'll be actually going more into both of these businesses and how they actually are interrelated. So today, Ronda Taylor, welcome to our show.
Hi, Kevin. Thank you so much. I am happy to be here.
I'm glad it's been a while since I've seen you. It's been, I don't know, maybe a year or 2 years since I've seen you.
Yeah, it has been a while. We have a lot of mutual friends, but you and I don't travel in the same circles as much as we used to.
Yes, that is correct. And I'm getting back into some of those circles as well. But so Rhonda, could you tell me a little bit about who you are and what is it that you do, and possibly even why is it that you do it?
That can be a loaded question, but absolutely. You know, first of all, let me back up a little bit. So you said award-winning book designer, and I've been in the publishing industry for over 20 years. And I am really passionate about the industry. And I started as a book designer. My background is in graphic design. And I started as a book designer back when I had two clients from San Francisco, and they were law of attraction coaches, and they were doing a book with Mark Victor Hansen and Jack Canfield. And they asked me to do the cover for their Chicken Soup for the Soul book. And, I had to go through the approval process, and I got some thumbs up with some concepts that I submitted. And that whole experience started my love affair with book design. And so from that moment, I have been a book designer. I have designed dozens and dozens of books. And of course, when you're working with authors, you're really holding their baby in your hands. It takes a lot of trust, and you as an author know that.
Yes.
And so it's a very delicate subject. And I like to just think of myself as the conduit that just turns their book from concept into reality. And it's something I'm really, really passionate about. And that kind of segued into me also coaching authors on how to become successful published authors. And then, of course, a few years ago, I also founded HeartWork Publishing. It just seemed like the segue into the direction that I was going. And so I really love supporting authors on their journey of becoming self-published authors. And that really just kind of has been my mainstay. And I have, I travel while I do it because it's completely virtual. And so I was just able to combine my love of travel with my passion for design and publishing, and I've just created a really fun life.
And because that's why was one of the reasons I wanted to bring you on the show, is because you are, as you were calling it, a digital nomad, that you're doing all of this work now, but you don't have a stationary location. You're just out there traveling and seeing the world.
That's right. I am. So November 2016, I sold everything I owned. I bought a backpack and a one-way ticket to Costa Rica. And I backpacked solo throughout Central and South America for 9 months. And I worked the entire time I did that. So I also work as a subcontractor. So in addition to my own clients, I subcontract with other publishing companies as their lead book designer. And we have been working together for over 10 years. So we have this really beautiful relationship, and they were completely supportive, which really wasn't a hard sell because we were already working virtually. So I went to Costa Rica. I hopped on a bus the next day and went to Nicaragua, where I lived in the jungle for a month. And I began my new life. So I traveled through Nicaragua and Costa Rica, Panama, went through the San Blas Islands by boat for 4 days, and went over to Colombia and toured through Colombia and then Peru and Ecuador. And the entire time I worked, I volunteered, and I also interviewed the women business owners that I volunteered with, because I'm also writing a book. And my book is about what female entrepreneurship looks like in Central and South America. And so I have a lot of interviews that I have conducted with these amazing, talented, inspiring women that I met on my journey. And so I've really just been able to combine everything that I've loved and making a dream come true as being my own author, or as becoming an author. So I've supported dozens and dozens of authors for so many years, and now I'm doing my own. So it's been really exciting.
Now, I think you were telling me this is your first book that you did not co-write. This is your first solo book.
It is. So I'm going through that same process that every other author goes through, from, having this idea, this concept, and then going through all the ups and downs and the roller coaster of emotions, as, I'm sure you're familiar with, when it comes to writing a book. So, fortunately, it might be a little easier for me to go through some of the steps. And it's also a challenge, when you tend to overthink things, or sometimes things are so simple that you overthink it.
Well, there, as you know, there's a lot that goes into a book. I mean, even deciding, is it going to be hardcover or soft cover is a big deal. So, and
that's right.
And even, when I had a book writing coach, one of the first things he talked about was, how long do you want the book to be? How many, and then that translates to how many words is it going to be? And just,
right.
Now you have a target, like, I want to write a 50,000 word book, and then if you writing your first draft, I know when I wrote my book, Designing Your Own Destiny, my goal was to get to 50 to 60,000 words. And in my first draft, and I put everything I could in there, and I wrote it, and it took me months to write it. I got to 30,000. Like, wow, I got to double this.
Right. Yeah. Because 30,000 words is not a lot.
No, people think it's a lot, but it's about 120, 130 pages, which
right.
Right. Which is, if you're going through Amazon, I think they have a minimum of 110 pages just so that you can get your name printed on the spine.
Exactly.
So it's not going to be thick enough.
Right. Yeah. Yes. Otherwise, it's just called a booklet, and nobody wants a booklet. Not if you have bigger dreams of being a published author.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, the interesting thing, though, about my experience with writing this book is, my initial idea was, I'm going to write this book about, the other female entrepreneurs that I meet on my journey. And what it has really turned into is, I've had so many beautiful experiences myself, and crazy and scary and adventurous, that it just was a no-brainer. It's like my journey is very much interwoven into this book with all the women that I met, because I volunteered for them. So I really got connected to them, and I learned about them. I lived with them, and I stayed with their families, and I helped them run their businesses. And so there was a lot of collaboration. And so, there were just so many crazy things on my journey that happened. The first 12 hours of my trip, I think if I didn't have the tools that I had with all the personal development work that I've done and the personal growth tools that I had, I probably would have been on the first plane back to the United States. I left the country, did not speak any Spanish.
I know we've had this conversation pre-call.
Yeah.
She's doing all of this. She's traveling to a country where Spanish is the primary language, and she's doing these interviews, and she doesn't even speak Spanish.
Correct.
So it's not only are you doing this, as you said, with a backpack that could fit just a few changes of clothes and your computer.
Yep.
You also have to worry about finding an interpreter or finding somebody that speaks English.
That's right. That's right. And it's really interesting how it's really hard to believe how organic this experience, how the connections really came to be, because I only knew that I was going to be volunteering and living in the jungle for my first month in Nicaragua. That's really all I knew. I had no other plan. I didn't know where I was staying. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know what I was going to do. I was just going to figure it out as I went along. And when I looked at it at the end of my journey, when I came back, when I really just wrote down all the people that I met and how I was connected to them and how each place, it was so organic and such a beautiful revelation that, now I'm inspired to go back and keep going, because I mean, there were some really crazy things that happened. It's like I was attacked by scorpions and I'm in the middle of the jungle. There's no medical facility. So I'm, having to let the poison run through my system. And I fell and fractured my hand and could not seek medical attention. I was attacked for my cell phone. And, but I did knock him off his bicycle and I got my phone back. So, just a lot of crazy experiences, and it was just all part of the journey. So, when things like that happen, you have to kind of include them in your book.
And that's true, because when I was in the Navy, I was stationed in Japan for 4 years. And when I was there was one time I was in the Philippines and I got held up by knife point, in the back of they call it a jeepney. That's what they call it. But so it's like a small bus where you just hop into the back. And me and my shipmate had we were heading back to the ship on a private jeepney ride. And the other guy just jumps in and he holds it up at knife point. And I just remember, right. It was a scary thing, but I don't think he was going to hurt us. He was just threatening us. So we gave him a little bit of money, or he wanted our IDs. I said, we have our Liberty cards, which is something that was kind of disposable anyway. So we just gave him that, and then he jumped off and was gone. And it was a little bit of a scary moment, but I was like, that is part of the experience, and I would not trade that for the world. It's like, hey.
Yeah. Absolutely. And there is nothing I would not do again, because I learned so much, not just about the journey, but I learned so much about myself. I learned what I was capable of. I learned how resourceful I could be. Oh, yes. All I had was a 70-liter backpack. I traveled with 5 sets of clothes for 9 months. So you have to be mindful of the weather when it's time to do the laundry. It's not like I can throw it in a washing machine and a dryer and voila, my laundry's done. It's, I'm washing my laundry in concrete sinks and buckets, and I have to know, is it going to rain tomorrow? Because if it is, then my clothes are going to be wet. It's going to take 4 days instead of 2 days for them to dry. So it's like, you really have to start thinking on a completely different level in a completely different way. And then when you're working on top of it, Wi-Fi. That's my that's part of my livelihood, that and my laptop. As long as I have those 2 things, I can do pretty much anything. However, finding really strong Wi-Fi connections in those developing countries was often a challenge.
So and it's free Wi-Fi, obviously. You're probably talking about, at least in America, it'd be coffee shops, McDonald's, and hotels.
Right. And I often stayed in hostels. And, which is a different level of challenge. We did have a little bit of convenience there. However, with typical hostels in Central and South America, it's not a private room and a private bathroom. You're in a dorm room with many other backpackers. And most of them for me were, in their early 20s, they're on their gap year from college, or they're just, renegades and nomads and just traveling their life anyway. So it's like, I learned so much from these kids. And, I'm really, really grateful for what they brought to the table. And then, you know, just the digital nomad concept, once I got into like the bigger cities, like when I was in Colombia, they have a really large expat community and an even bigger digital nomad community. The Wi-Fi is good. And I was able to, you know, choose Airbnb rooms versus hostels when I was in these bigger. I mean, if you can try and wrap your head around a city that's a population of 8 million people, and it was mind-boggling, and the opportunity to be more productive was often you know, in the larger cities. I found myself in much smaller cities where the Wi-Fi is a challenge. And even, you know, when I was traveling by bus, you know, I had to pay attention to, even though they would advertise they have Wi-Fi, you know, what ended up being real was a little different. You know, it's like, well, yeah, we have Wi-Fi, but in the city, you know, while we're in the big city, you know, you won't have Wi-Fi as we're traveling from city, you know, the smaller cities. Or, you know, there were a couple of times where they were like, oh yeah, well, we usually do have Wi-Fi, but this particular bus model doesn't have it. Or, so it's like, you had to ask different questions. And so, you know, it just made it all a beautiful part of the journey. And fortunately, I had clients who were just who were very patient sometimes, because I did find myself in cities where the Wi-Fi was horrible. And I actually had to leave. When I was in southern Peru, I visited Lake Titicaca, and down in Puno, the Wi-Fi connection was so poor that I actually had to cut my trip short, because we just kept getting cut off with phone calls, and I couldn't get a stable Wi-Fi connection. So I ended up having to go back to Lima, Peru, just to be able to finish that project. And the whole experience of going back was crazy, because it was around the time where there was a really large earthquake that took place in Arequipa. And so the bus route was to go back to Arequipa, which would then take me up north to Lima, Peru. And as we were traveling back to Arequipa, we were like 4 or 5 hours in, we experienced aftershocks on the bus of the earthquake. And so we're riding along on the road, and we're shifting and we're moving, and it was a little scary. It was a little unnerving. And so we had to pull off, and we sat there for like an hour until they figured out what we needed to do. And we ended up having to turn the bus around and go all the way around. It added 12 hours to our already 12-hour bus ride, because then we had to go all the way back up and around through Cusco.
And did they have to like change drivers and such? I mean, how do they do that? You just ask the
right. There was nothing else to do. All they could do was turn the bus around and go a different direction, because we were in danger if we were to keep going through Arequipa, or, you know, toward Arequipa, because of the aftershocks. And we could feel them, and it was a little crazy. So, you know, so it added another 12 hours. So 24 hours later, you know, I finally got back to Lima. And like I said, you know, my clients fortunately were really patient, you know, with getting this project done. But, you know, it's just like, you just have to make quick decisions to make sure that it happens.
Yeah, because obviously for you couldn't always stick to a schedule because of just the situation.
Exactly. You have to be flexible, because the Wi-Fi is not always, and most cities are running off of 3G. So we don't have out, you know, in South America and Central America, we don't have the luxury of the high-speed internet that we have here in the United States. Now, there are some cities obviously that do, and you have to ask the right questions in order to make sure you're getting the top Wi-Fi speeds that are available.
And since you do a lot of digital stuff, those are massive files. And
oh yeah, my graphic design files, my book design files, they're huge sometimes, because I often work with a lot of I do a lot of children's books as well, and so, you know, they're always very heavy with the illustrations and graphics, and these files are, you know, gigabytes large, and it takes a strong Wi-Fi. I mean, I can spend hours transferring files. sometimes, and so I have to make sure that I have my external hard drives as well, because anything can happen. And, this is my only laptop. I traveled with a backpack that had, I had two backpacks. So I had a 70-liter backpack that had my gear and my clothing and shoes and all that, my hammock, because I found myself having to strap my hammock between two trees a couple of times. And
that's definitely roughing it.
It was roughing it. The other backpack was one I carried in front, and it carried all of my devices. I am a hobbyist photographer, amateur photographer. So I had my camera gear, my lenses, I carried my tripod, and plus I had, my iPad and my MacBook Pro and all of my cords and cables and, my power banks. And it's like, you really have to be equipped to handle any kind of situation. So that backpack never left my body. It went with me everywhere, because that was my livelihood. It had everything in it that was important, to me and making my work life
because if somebody
possible.
Snatch that backpack as let's say you're in a hostel, you're in the showers, and somebody snatches it, that's your whole life right there.
Oh yeah. Yes. So everything goes under lock and key. And so, I mean, that just became normal. And the other interesting thing is, you're always on high alert. So you have to be aware of who's watching you working in a coffee shop, or, positioning yourself in the proper place of the restaurant, having your back against the corner so that you're always able to see everyone in your view, because, they're very crafty. They're very crafty and very quick. And they often enroll kids into helping them. They will have a kid, if you're using your cell phone and taking a photo of something in the air, and they'll have these little kids just come and run up and jump and grab the cell phones right out of your hands. And because they're small and they're fast, the chances of you catching up to them are really slim. So they're very crafty.
And by saying, if you're at a coffee shop and you're doing that, and now you try to go out to the kid with a cell phone, now all somebody's grabbing your computer.
Right. Yes. Yeah. I mean, I learned a lot of I learned a lot of tips and tricks, when it comes to riding in taxis and, transportation and working in coffee shops or working in hostels. You have to be on high alert.
Now, just out of curiosity, these women that you interviewed, these entrepreneur women, mm-hmm. What kind of businesses were they running? Were they larger businesses, small businesses? What kind of businesses?
So the first, in the jungle, I lived in Nicaragua. This woman ran a yoga retreat center.
Oh, wow.
And so she was a business owner for the Ahimsa is the name of her yoga retreat center. And another was an owner of a another kind of retreat center, but on a different level in Costa Rica. I interviewed my Spanish teacher. She was an entrepreneur. She teaches Spanish online. She also teaches English. And there was a woman in Nicaragua. She owned a shoe store, but it wasn't it wasn't like in a building. It's like she literally had a board of her shoes, like on a pegboard outside on a main street. And that was her livelihood. This is what she did to take care of her family. She was a single mom, and she was taking care of her grandparents as well. So the interesting thing is entrepreneurship looks very, very different for most people in Central and South America. It's just a way of life for them. It's a way for them to provide for their family, and so if you have a talent or a trade or a skill, because the job rate they only had a 40% job rate in Nicaragua.
So that means what, 40% employment rate?
Correct.
So it would be a 60% unemployment rate.
Unemployment rate, correct. Wow. So jobs are very few and far between. And so there are a lot of people who just do what they have to do. If you're 80 years old and you know how to make tortillas, you're up at 5 o'clock in the morning singing tortilla sales, walking through the neighborhoods. And, they will buy water bottles to sell while you're waiting in line, at a traffic stop, or they're just very creative. And it's the only way they have to make a living sometimes. Another one of the entrepreneurs was, they own it was a mother-daughter team, and they make handmade greeting cards, beautiful, beautiful cards. And they're all handmade with stitching and beads, and they don't have a vehicle. So they travel by bus to all of these neighboring cities and literally just walk in from store to store and ask if their cards can be placed in a basket on a counter to sell. And they do this every week.
So the store proprietor would say buy 10 of their cards that say, let's call it $1 a piece, and then he was probably selling it for $1.50.
Mm-hmm.
So
right.
It's not like you got to sell it first and then I come back and catch my profit, because obviously that wouldn't work.
Exactly. So, I interviewed a restaurant owner in Panama City, and I interviewed a business coach in Peru, in Lima. And then I hired a shaman because I did some ritual ceremony work with ayahuasca, and her shaman performed the ceremony, but she is also a coach. And so I interviewed her, and I just met some really, really amazing people doing amazing things. And they're all very talented and very intelligent and very savvy in most cases, and successful in their own right. And it was a beautiful thing to experience, because we might wonder, what they're capable, not what they're capable of doing, but, we might wonder how much more difficult it is. Cause I know that I kind of went in thinking it would be more difficult for them. And really, if they want to make it work, they do.
Okay. And could you tell me a little bit about your other company? I know the time of this recording, you're about to launch it, but by the time people are listening it's actually going to go ahead and be launched. And you call this company HeartWork Travels. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Correct. HeartWork Travels is the group that I formed, or I have a Facebook group called HeartWork Travels, and that's where I documented my journey through video and photos and just sharing my experiences. And so as part of this book project, it's also forming connection and collaboration between, all of the tribe that I have here in the United States and all the international women, my new tribe. So it's really about connecting and collaborating. And so I'm working on, there's a lot of different things right now. It's a book project, a way to support the book project and continue with my book, with all the processing that still has to be done and all the travel and the interviews. But I'm also, looking for sponsors for people who want to sponsor one of the women in my book, like as a chapter. And the other piece of that too is I was asked so many questions from people about, how does this work and how are you making a living, and, what were you afraid of? So it's going to include some mentorship simply about how I traveled, how I was able to make this work for 9 months. And also another level of it will be mentorship about, how to put a book together or marketing a book, because, those are all skills I have as well. And then there's going to be another component later on that's added about retreats. I'm going to be doing some book writing retreats as well as just some travel retreats, because one thing I learned was, not everyone knows how to just leave the country. Well, I didn't know how to leave the country. I just did it. And I just figured it out as I went along. And I found that the friends who met me on my journey, when I just took care of everything, they were just so grateful. So being able to, you know, kind of do a reconnaissance and just figure everything out before you get there, that was really valuable for them. And that's something I'm willing to do for anyone that wants to join me on my journey. And the door is always open. I am always open to meeting people along the way and share this journey with me, because that was one of the things that really made me sad is, you know, I saw so many beautiful things and got to experience so many amazing places, and I did it alone. And there were so many times where it's just like Lake Titicaca or Machu Picchu, or, you know, it was kind of a catch-22. So it was a beautiful thing to do on my own. And yet there were so many things I wish I could have shared with someone.
We've talked about this offline as well, is that you're about to go on another excursion back to South America again.
I am. I leave on February 19th, and I'm going back to South America. I am calling, I'm going to call my home base in Medellin, Colombia. I really created a new community there. So I'm going back to what's familiar. I'm going back to friends that I've made, and I belong to the Women Entrepreneurs of Medellin, and we'll be collaborating with some of the women there. So I'm really excited. I'm going to be traveling so while I'm living in Medellin, then that will give me the opportunity to travel through Argentina, Bolivia, Chile, Patagonia. I'm going back to Peru. I have an amazing opportunity to travel into the Amazonian jungle with my shaman and interview the villagers, the women villagers. And so I have lots of exciting things in the works, and I am excited to get back to Colombia and get back into the swing of things.
That's pardon the pun there with you, because you were just talking about a hammock there earlier. Now you're going back to Colombia. Is this still again, it's going to be a one-way ticket?
About a one-way ticket. And, you know, I was told, well, actually afterwards, I was told that I wasn't going to be allowed to buy a one-way ticket to Costa Rica, but it wasn't a problem. And I know now that I should probably have some kind of a return ticket. Actually, all you have to do is show proof that you're leaving the country at some point.
Okay.
And so, I mean, it's all workable solutions. So yes, I bought a one-way ticket to Medellin, Colombia.
And let me ask you this: when did you decide to do the return trip back to the U.S.? Because I know you because we met each other in Las Vegas, and you're currently in Las Vegas at this moment.
Yeah.
What was the deciding factor for you to come back to the U.S.? Because you obviously had to buy another one-way ticket.
Right. Well, coming back to the U.S., I mean, obviously, I'm a mom, I'm a grandmother, I'm a daughter. And so I needed to come back to see family, you know, my kids. And, you know, that's really the beautiful of all this internet technology is I was able to stay connected to my family through video chats. And, you know, it's a beautiful thing when you can reach out to your grandkids and they can see where you're at and what you're doing. And I would send them postcards from the different countries that I was visiting. And so I came back to see family, to see friends. 9 months is a long time to be away. And to be honest with you, you know, it's a lonely journey. And when you're an extrovert like I am, you know, being surrounded by people and not being able to do that most of the time, it was a challenge for me. So I was ready to come back and kind of regroup and get grounded again and kind of, you know, get reconnected with family and friends. And I knew that I was going back to South America the day I left. I cried all the way home. I was just miserable. I was not ready to leave even after 9 months. And, you know, I feel like I left a part of my heart there. So I knew before I came back to Las Vegas that I was already going back to South America.
And normally at this point, we go into your successes and challenges and failures and stuff, which you've been covering some of those already.
Yeah.
So this format is going to be a little bit different. Is how I'm feeling on the flow here.
Okay.
What are some things that you learned on your journey that you know to either do or not do this upcoming excursion?
That's a great question. So, you know, some of the biggest things I took away from my journey is, quite honestly, I learned how to trust myself. and I learned how to be resourceful. And there was a lot of trial and error. So what I learned how to do versus what not to do often happened because I was a victim of some kind of circumstance, like when my cell phone was stolen from my hand from a man who was riding his bicycle. I'm walking on the street and I already knew, I had been warned that this could happen. This was in Nicaragua. And I had been warned, and I was walking out of the neighborhood. So I lived in a homestay with a homestay family while I took Spanish lessons in Granada. And I'm walking out of the neighborhood and I'm walking up a hill, and I was meeting friends for dinner, and I was looking at my map because it was a restaurant I hadn't been to before. So I was just making sure I was on track. And, it's like I had my phone up and my gut just told me to look up. And in that instant, I saw the look on this guy's face, and it was like just nanoseconds. It all happened so quickly. I no more than looked up, and he had this look of absolute determination on his face, and he snatched the phone right out of my hand. And just as a knee-jerk reaction, I kind of just reached over and grabbed him. And it ended up being enough because he was coming at me at a really high rate of speed. So it was just enough to knock him off his bike. He went flying. He ended up really injured. He had road rash all over his body. And the bike went another direction, and the phone was laying right next to him. And, it was a combination of, fear and rage. It's like I was just so upset that he tried to take advantage of me. I'm a single woman, older woman, traveling by myself. And I don't know, that inner tigress or whatever emerged, and I was just furious. And so, I went over and I threw a few F-bombs his way, and there were other witnesses that were also giving him, they were shaming him quite a bit. And so I just kind of decided that they could take care of it. I walked over and picked up my phone and walked away and went to the restaurant to meet my friends for dinner. And I ended up having to come back, at night. And what I learned is that kid actually lived in the same neighborhood that I was staying. And it was the next day that I decided it was time to move on. So it was things like that. So one of the biggest lessons, honestly, was, being present. So I had a tattoo. I don't know if you can see it, but I had a tattoo added when I got back. It says, "Be here now." And I've got this heart that's a watercolor. And that was one of the biggest lessons for me, was to always be present, because when I wasn't, that's when I, tripped on a cobblestone road and fractured my hand. And that's when I got attacked by scorpions. And it's when I lost my glasses. I left my glasses on a rock on top of a volcano, and it was my only pair of glasses. And so, I went for 2 months without a way to be able to see. And it was all about being present. And
are these reading glasses, or are these like distance glasses, or both?
Oh no, they were not reading glasses. And I did happen to take with me an extra pair of reading glasses, but the frames were broken. And so these things were taped and tied, and it was the only thing I had to read up close, because my distance is fine. I could not see anything up close. And the funny thing about this whole story is, now it was like 2 hours each way to go up to this volcano and down, and it was a really grueling hike. And I was about 3/4 of the way down when I realized I didn't have my glasses. And the only reason I knew I didn't have my glasses, or the only reason it didn't dawn on me before I left, was because my cell phone had died. So if I had needed a reason to look at my cell phone, I would have went, oh wait, I can't read it, I don't have my glasses on. So I got all the way down, 3/4 of the way down this volcano, and realized I did not have my glasses, and I knew exactly where I thought I had left them. And
that's an hour and a half journey back uphill.
Right. I could not go back. It was too hard, and it was getting dark. And so it just was not a smart thing for me to do. So I ended up having to leave what I thought my glasses were on the glasses were on the rock. And to try and make this long story short, it was 2 months later. I'm looking for something in my backpack. I can't find it. So I'm taking everything out. And I have this special pouch where my laptop goes. And so I even had taken that out, and I'm digging and digging and digging, and I feel something on the bottom. And I'm like, the only thing that was ever put in that pouch was my laptop. And I'm feeling the bottom, and I'm like, what is this in my backpack? And I pull out my mangled glasses. The lenses, the ones I thought I'd left behind for 2 months. And the glasses were with me the entire time. So I'm sure there's a whole nother story about the analogy about all of that, because it really became true about how this journey unfolded for me, you know, where something so important is right inside and you're looking everywhere else for them the entire time. And the whole time it was right there, right with me.
And the thing was, your computer was banging against those glasses for 2 months.
Oh, yes. Yeah. The lenses were scratched. I mean, the lenses themselves were not broken. They were scratched. They had popped out of their frames because it was just a wire frame. And I mean, the glasses were just completely mangled. It was almost comical. And
there's no optometry stores?
No, well, not where I was. So I had to wait until I got to Columbia. So I ended up getting a brand new pair in Medellin. So yeah, it's so lots of lessons, being present, learning how to, you know, trust myself, like I said. And, you know, there was a lot of surrendering, because things, as you know, things don't always look the way you think they should. And I had to surrender to what things were supposed to look like a lot.
And that is very true, because that probably taught you to be much more open-minded than you already were. Is that you're living at the situation that's outside of your control for many parts.
Right, and outside of your comfort zone. Let's not forget that.
I mean, I don't know if I would be able to do something like that, and I don't know how many of our listeners or viewers would either. So that's we applaud you for what you've done.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, what were some of the things that you now know you wouldn't do? Because I'm trying to go down the road of your fears.
Right.
So what kind of fears did you have, and what kind of fears did you overcome?
Well, a lot of the fears I overcame really had to do with the language barrier. So I'm still not an expert in Spanish. I'm not even close to being an expert in Spanish. And so even going back to South America, there's a little bit of fear that just reminds me, it's like, oh, you still didn't master the language. There's still going to be that barrier. Because I found myself in, you know, some interesting predicaments sometimes, because the language doesn't always come across properly. And even though I took Spanish lessons and I continue to practice, you know, I relied on Google Translate a lot. And I can tell you right now, it's not always that accurate. Because I did get myself in trouble a few times with some words and the way they use words, which is very different for us. And the interesting thing is they use far fewer words. And so, you know, because I've been in publishing and I've been working with editing and all those things all these years, you know, I am like the grammar snob and the spelling snob. And I had to let all that stuff go just to get my point across. So there is still fear, like when I walk up to a register to order a meal, you know, and even though I may know how to ask the question, I don't always understand the response. And so that's where the fun begins. And, you know, so it's something that you just have to laugh at yourself about, and all you can do is just get better. So I keep practicing, and you know, it's that fear that I have to overcome in order to make it work, because I know I'm going back to South America, not speaking Spanish any better than I did, because I've been back here for 4 months. I haven't really had the practice. I haven't had someone to, you know, converse with on a daily basis to keep my Spanish up. So that is already a fear that I'm going back to, that it's like, oh my gosh, it's, you know, because it's a challenge. The language barrier is definitely a challenge.
And I was fortunate enough back in the 80s to be in the U.S. Navy. And for 4 years, I was stationed in Japan. So I can understand to some extent what you mean, because there were times when I was in Japan and they use characters that aren't letters, that aren't the alphabet. So it's not like you can look at the word and say carne. Okay, I think that means chicken or that, or beef or pork, or one of those things. But you can read the word. But if you see like two characters with the arms, the lines all crossed over on each other, it's much harder to read.
Yes. Yes.
And I still remember, this was the 80s. Cell phones weren't invented yet. I didn't have Google Translate. It didn't exist.
Oh, I know.
Yes, trying to order food at a Japanese restaurant, and they don't speak English. I don't speak Japanese. And I don't even understand all the jumbled characters that are there.
Right.
So you had to be creative. You had to be observant. You had to like find solutions to it. And there were ways around it. I mean, in the book, I talk about. I would walk into a Japanese restaurant and I would see the images display like fake bowls of ramen noodles or something like that.
Right.
And I'll look at that, and then I'll look at the little the card that was underneath it. Let's say it said 37, and then it had like 6 characters there. And there, I was like, okay, remember this 37? Let me memorize those first 3 or 4 characters. They hand me the menu, and I look for 37. I make sure that there was the same 4 characters, and if they weren't, then I'd go and find it. Like say now it's 48 because that's an old card. So like, man, this is a new menu. And I just point at 48 and say mizu, which I knew meant water, or Coca-Cola. So you had to be able to get around.
It's very true. And I was really fortunate. I did not get sick one time. Awesome. I traveled through 7 countries and did not even so much as get a stomach ache. And
a lot of people get sick just because of the water.
I know. And I did travel with a water bottle that had a filter inside, so it removed all the toxins and bacteria. So it was perfect, when I'm backpacking and hiking through all the jungle areas, because I could literally fill this from river water and drink it and be just fine. And I used it all the time, even when I used tap water to drink when there wasn't bottled water available. And so I could be a spokesperson for that water bottle brand, because I do believe that it contributed to my health while I was there, because I never got sick. Out of all the vendor carts I ate at, and the restaurants, all the different kinds of food I ate. Sometimes I didn't even know what I was eating, and sometimes I'd look at it and go, no, not eating that.
Yeah, I have yet to eat a fish head, so that's I've been to some.
I did eat alpaca while I was there. I was not able to eat guinea pig, and it's very, very popular in Peru. It's cuy is the name, and I might try it when I go back, but I'm still not sure, because I saw a bunch of cute little guinea pigs and I just couldn't do it. But it's very common there.
Well, and I mean, I can understand where you're coming from on that, because I eat meat as well. I'm not a vegetarian or a vegan or anything.
Right.
And in the Philippines, I've eaten that carch as well. And it was meat on a stick. Is all I knew. I had no idea what kind of meat it was.
Right. Well, there were many times when I just chose vegetarian options, and I mean, I ended up losing, another 20 pounds while I was traveling. Of course, I was walking everywhere, but I was also very mindful of what I ate. And fruits and vegetables were always fresh fruits and vegetables. There's no such thing as organic there, because the food is really healthy. And although I did indulge in cup of noodles a lot, I will admit.
Now, how heavy was your pack, would you say?
Oh gosh, my pack was at least 50 pounds.
That's both of them combined, the front and back.
No. My pack in front was at least 35 to 40 pounds. And my pack, both packs were very, very heavy. Very, very heavy.
Okay. Because your backpack, not your front pack, has more than your clothes in it. I mean, you could probably have food in there. You're going to have, like you said, a hammock in there. You're going to have.
Right. Yeah. I had my hammock. I had like all the emergency tools. I had my little, my knife and, all the normal backpack stuff, my shoes, and, but I also had, my tripod and my walking sticks and those kinds of things. My coat. So yeah, it was, but you know, you roll everything up really nice and tight, and there's actually a lot you can fit inside the backpack, and there's like pouches and pockets galore. But that's the tricky thing, is that the one thing that I learned is you have to be extremely mindful to what everything weighs. So it's like if it had any kind of weight to it, it did not make the pack.
and I've been on a hike one time that was a 3-day hike, and it was actually hiking from the rim of the Grand Canyon all the way down to the Colorado River.
Oh wow!
And so we spent 3 days inside the canyon. That was Thanksgiving 1998. Yeah, 98. And so I understand that, because I mean, it was a 70-pound pack on our backs, and we're also bouldering. So we're climbing over that stuff. And since then, backpackers, you know, the backpackers that go for multi-day events, they have all kinds of little tricks and devices to, you know, you can reduce this by 3 ounces, reduce this by that. Oh yeah. Yeah. You know, it's absolutely the one thing that cured me from shopping. You know, I've always been one of those travelers that, you know, I have to buy souvenirs everywhere I go. I bought nothing. Yeah. I took a lot of pictures of, this is what I would have purchased if it wasn't so heavy. So I saved all of that until my very last trip, which I ended up in Ecuador. And so that's when I kind of got a few little things for, you know, my grandkids and kids and things like that. But most everything was like, I think the heaviest thing I purchased was an alpaca blanket for my mother. Everybody else got bracelets and pens. But it cured my shopping urges for sure, because whatever I purchased along the way meant I had to carry it with me, and that just wasn't happening. So I let go of a lot of things as I traveled. You should have seen what I took with me to begin with. It was ridiculous. And I just kind of made a rule that every time I stopped someplace, I would leave something behind for someone else. And so my pack became lighter as my journey continued, and which is why I was able to get a few things to bring back. So very, very mindful of what everything weighs now. Oh yeah, because going back to when I was at the Grand Canyon, I mean, like you said, everything counts. So we were taking in 3 days worth of food as well, and we had iodine tablets so we could get water out of the Colorado and that stuff, so we can have fresh water. Mm-hmm. So I want to carry a gallon jug with me, or 2 half-gallon jugs. And I remember I said, okay, I want to take some corn. I'm going to do, and remember, this is Thanksgiving. We went in on Wednesday night. We went in on Thursday and came back on Saturday. And I remember getting, cans of corn, and so I want to take that with me, but I just put it into a Ziploc bag because I didn't want to carry the weight of the aluminum can. Right. Everything matters. You're right. Every little ounce, it's like I would pick it up and it's like, yeah, no, this isn't coming with me, or yeah, maybe I can, but and there was a lot of compromise. It's like, well, if I want this bad enough, what am I willing to give up for it? Mm-hmm. Oh yes. Because as you said, you're hiking it for 9 months. Right. Yeah. It's like, I had to figure out, where are my hiking boots gonna go. And, I ended up lacing them up and, attaching them. There were a lot of things that were attached to the outside of my backpack because they weren't going to fit inside. And you just have to get really creative. And, but that was part of the fun. It's like, it really kind of just turned into a little game. It's like, not what only am I capable of, but what am I willing to let go of? Because when you sell everything you own in the first place and you're used to attachments, that all in itself was a lesson for me about letting go. Because what I realized as I was traveling is how liberating and freeing it became that I didn't have all of those possessions. It's like I could literally go anywhere and everything I had was with me. It was my home, and I had some problems with that too at first, because it's like, I didn't stay in any one place for more than 2 or 3 weeks at a time. I was constantly on the move, and I didn't live anywhere. And so I kind of had a challenge with, wanting to call a place home. Mm-hmm. And I really had to think about it in another way in order to get through all that, because what I realized is home is where my heart was.
And when I thought of it like that, it changed the dynamics of the journey from that point forward, because I just invited me to look at it in a different way, rather than thinking I needed a physical place to call home, because really that's not what the journey was about. It was about, moving forward always. And so, once I realized that, home is where my heart is, then it just made everything so much easier and enjoyable. I wasn't sad so much anymore. And, I got used to being by myself. And, at some point in my, not at some point, but, there was a time when, living inside my head was a scary place to be. And when you have to be with yourself 24/7, it brings up all new challenges, because, you got the crazy monkey chatter in your head, when things go right or go wrong. And that was one of the beautiful things too, is that, I was 100% responsible for every outcome. So the decisions that I made it was important to reflect on, because, I was 100% responsible for everything that went wrong, but I was also 100% responsible for everything that went right. And so there's a lot I can give myself credit for. There's a lot of things that I've done that I'm proud of. Going to a foreign country without knowing the language, and, communicating with taxi drivers and, just people, whether you go shopping or whether you're trying to find help. There's a whole long story about, the first 12 hours of my bus ride to Nicaragua. And I was escorted off the bus by militia, and because I didn't have the proper funds, and I thought that my ticket included everything. And they escorted me off the bus, and I had these 4 militia flanking me, and they're walking me to this area that's got this barbed wire fence. And I was terrified. I didn't know what was going on, because I didn't understand. And they didn't understand me. They wouldn't let me take my stuff off the bus. And they're like, dragging me into this unknown place. And I'm like, I am not going with you. And, they ended up forcing me over there, only to find out later that they're walking me up to an ATM machine that was like in this obscure place behind the back of this building, because it's like, once I turned the corner, nobody on the bus could see me anymore. And I didn't know what was going on. And the reason why I didn't have any funds, it was, there was like a whole bunch of mishaps that happened when I landed that night, or the night before. So I ended up with no cash, because it ended up going to an Airbnb host that I didn't know that he couldn't take my card. So I ended up having to give him all my cash. And so the taxi driver was supposed to take me to the ATM before I went to the bus station, but he was late. And then he took me to the wrong place. And then there was no time to go to the ATM. And then he hit a car on the way there. So it was like a whole series of mishaps. And then I get to the bus station, and they're like, yeah, no, your bus doesn't come here. I was so overwhelmed and frustrated. I just broke down into tears. I didn't know what else to do. I'm like, what have I done? What have I done? And this kind gentleman comes over to me, and he speaks a little bit of English, and he's like, can I help you? And so I explained to him. He got everything figured out. He went to the attendant and explained what was going on. And then he ended up finding out, yes, you are in the right place. And then he went and told the security guard, to watch for me. He told me which bus I was waiting for and to make sure that I got on it. So it's like, I relied on the kindness of strangers the entire time, and they came through every time. I never felt unsafe. There was just nothing that ever stood out where I was like, I don't feel safe at all. And it was, because I traveled through some countries that historically are dangerous countries, Nicaragua, Colombia. And I can tell you that I did not experience anything that couldn't have happened somewhere else. The guy that took the cell phone out of my hand, that could have happened walking down the Las Vegas Strip, So it really, it didn't feel unsafe to me.
Well, that's good to know, because I mean, 'cause this shows that there's good people all over the world. We're going to have to be wrapping up here. Is there for people that maybe want to follow you, hear more about your stories, and maybe even find the book that you're writing? Is there a way for them to get a hold of you? What's the best way for them to get a hold of you? I would say probably a website or a Facebook page.
Right. So HeartWork Travels is the Facebook group. So it's facebook.com/groups/HeartWork Travels.
Okay.
And my website, for anyone who's interested in writing a book or having questions about self-publishing, or heartworkpublishing.com. And I'm also on HeartWork Publishing, yeah. And I'm also on Instagram. I post a lot of photos of my journey. HeartWork Travels is my Instagram name. And of course, I'm on LinkedIn as well under HeartWork Publishing. So there's a lot of different ways to find me. And HeartWork Publishing has a Facebook page as well.
Okay, well, I'll put that out in the description of the show, so that people can follow all of these links. And I'll probably love to check out some of your Instagram stuff, just to see some of these travels that you've been on. Ronda, it's been a great pleasure hearing these stories that you've been telling me. I wish you well on your new journeys that you're going to be going on.
Thank you.
And I look forward to hearing about when your book comes out, and hearing about these other entrepreneurial women all across the world, or all across South America and Central America. I think this is going to be a fascinating read.
Thank you.
And,
thank you so much.
And I do appreciate you for being here. So I want to say I applaud you. Thank you very much. And
thank you.
And I will talk with you, and we'll talk another again, possibly about you when you come back for another interview, just to see where you are now. Okay.
Perfect. Thanks, okay. Kevin.
Thanks, Ronda. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Life's Little Lessons with your host, author of Designing Your Own Destiny, Kevin A. Dunlap. For more great content and to stay up to date, visit kevinadunlap.com, facebook.com/kevinadunlap.author, and on Twitter @KevinADunlap. We'll catch you on the next episode of Life's Little Lessons.